With Valentine's Day fastly approaching, the topics of love and relationships are pretty much on everybody's mind in one way, shape, or form. I know that when I do natal chart consultations, when I do readings, in fact, when I do any kind of consulting with people whatsoever, the number one question that they always have is about relationships. Either how to get into one, when are they gonna get into one, or like how to change an existing one. Relationships are a major part of our lives, and thankfully, astrology has all of the answers, all right? So let's take a deep dive into love, relationships, and astrology, all right? Let's go. So typically, people usually have one or two questions. There's the how, as in, how do I get into a relationship? How do I find my partner? And then there's the when. When am I gonna get into a relationship? When am I gonna get married? So first, let's tackle the how. So in order to find out how, to answer the question how, we have to look at our natal chart, of course. Everything starts and ends with the natal chart, all right? So there's different ways that you can look at it. And I want you to remember one thing about astrology. Astrology, like there's levels to this. You can do a very surface level sweep, or you can get really deep and sort of substantive and introspective. So I'm gonna try to do a little bit of both in this video, all right? So again, the how. So in order to find out how you're going to get into a relationship, how are you going to meet somebody, there's different factors that we can look at in the natal chart that can answer this question. So first, let's examine ourselves, our particular personality and characteristics. There are certain parts of our personality that have to do with relationships, mainly our emotions. So in order to find out how is our emotional style, we look to the planet, the moon. So check out where the moon is in your chart. It'll let you know how you emote, how, different situations make you feel, what feels good in relationships. So like, for instance, if you have the moon in Cancer in your natal chart, definitely when it comes to relationships, you're going to be someone who needs nurturing or someone who nurtures. Maybe nurturing is a big part of your relationship style. You may also be very defensive or a bit sensitive when it comes to your relationships, particularly with people that you love and truly care for. So again, look to the moon, see what sign it is, and sort of work out the characteristics of that sign as it relates to the moon. And that'll tell you your emotional style in relationships. Next up, you're going to want to look at Venus because, of course, Venus is the planet of love and romance. So Venus in your natal chart will let you know your general relationship style, or more so like your type, generally speaking, in an overly broad sort of way. So for instance, if you have Venus in Libra is someone who, when it comes to relationships, they're very charming, they're very charismatic, and they're very sociable. More so than that, they're more than willing to usually start a new relationship, meaning that they will go up to someone new and strike up a conversation and really start to relate to people. Whereas someone who's got like a Venus in Capricorn will be a little more reserved, a lot less emotional, and really just take relationships very seriously and not too very emotional, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So when it comes to us as individuals, in the natal chart, you look to the moon and Venus, and that will let you know your emotional and your relationship style. Now, pro tip, you'll also want to look at Mercury because Mercury rules communication. Your Mercury in your natal chart will show you how you communicate to people. And communication is obviously a huge part of relationships. So if you're someone who's got, let's say, like Mercury in Gemini, you're someone who's very intellectual. You really have to relate to people on an intellectual and a verbal sort of level. You also tend to be a little immature, no shade to Geminis, very chatty, witty, have a sense of humor. Those are the qualities that either you exude or that you may find attractive in other people, all right? So pro tip, also look to where Mercury is in your chart. So that pretty much deals with you, right? But we're not in relationships alone. We have to think about our partners. So now let's take a look at different qualities of partners that we may be attracted to and how we can figure that out in the natal chart. All right, so we're still answering the question, how we get into relationships. So we already talked about ourselves. Now let's talk about our partners. So in the natal chart, the natal chart can definitely tell you what type of partner you'll be attracted to. So if you are a man or someone who identifies with a male energy, you would look to the sign of Venus because that represents women or feminine energy in your natal chart. So let's say you're a man and you've got Venus in Sagittarius. Typically, you would be attracted to women who are free-spirited, who are optimistic and spontaneous, who are over the top and very fiery. But by contrast, if you were, let's say, a man with Venus in Virgo, you would find women who are a bit more reserved, very down-to-earth, practical, organizational, someone who is of service. All of those Virgo type qualities is what you would look for in a woman. So for men, you would look to Venus in your natal chart. So for women who are attracted to men or masculine energy, you would look to two different planets. You would look to Mars and you would look to Jupiter. So Mars is kind of the man that you like to date. It's the man that you're physically attracted to, right? So as a woman, if you've got Mars in a sign like Leo or Aries, you are into men who are all about the dog and pony show. These are dudes who are flashy, who really like to put on a show, who are very extroverted, who could be a bit macho, very attention seeking, you know, those dudes who are popping bottles in the club. You know, that's the kind of dude that you would be interested in dating or you would be physically attracted to. On the other hand, when it comes to a husband, you would look to the planet Jupiter. So the characteristics of wherever your Jupiter is in your natal chart is who would make a good husband for you or the qualities that you look for in a husband. So as a woman, let's say you've got Jupiter in, let's say Scorpio. So when it comes to finding a husband, when it comes to the type of man that you would want to marry, this would be someone who would be deep, who would be aware of their emotions, who would be a bit mysterious and exude a lot of sexy, sultry energy, okay? Now, keep in mind, when it comes to partnerships and how it is sort of put together in our natal charts, just because you have, let's say you're a woman and you have Jupiter in Capricorn, doesn't mean that you would necessarily find a husband who is a Capricorn. It's really more about the characteristics of your Jupiter sign, all right? Or your Mars sign or your Venus sign, right? So that's pretty much how we would find partners, okay? And remember, it's all about the qualities that the person exudes. Those are the type of qualities that you would be attracted to, either when it comes to dating or when it comes to marriage, all right? And speaking of dating and marriage, this is gonna take me to my third point when we're talking about the how when it comes to relationships. All right, so we've talked about ourselves, we talked about our partners. Now we need to talk about the areas of life that have to do with romance and relationships. And to that, we look to the 5th and the 7th houses in our natal charts. These are the two houses that have to do with relationships. So on one hand, the 5th house has to do with romance, it has to do with sex, it has to do with dating, sort of the fun side and the physical side of relationships. Whereas the 7th house covers committed relationships. So it covers marriage and it covers long-term partnerships and commitments. So you would definitely look towards your 5th and your 7th house in your natal chart to figure out what your dating life and your married life or your committed life is going to look like. Now, remember I said before, there's levels to this shit in astrology, all right? So it's more than just about looking at your 5th and 7th house. You have to look at two, right? This would be 4. 2 particular things with respect to your 5th house and your 7th house. Well, there's more than 2 things, but for the sake of this video, I'm only going to talk about 2. So first, you're going to want to look at whatever planets are in your 5th and 7th houses, okay? These planets will let you know what the climate is with respect to dating and with respect to commitment. So if you've got planets like Venus or Jupiter in your 5th and or 7th houses, this means that when it comes to relationships, when it comes to dating and commitment, you're likely going to experience an abundance or a lot of positive energy with respect to that. So if you've ever known people who seem like they're always in great relationships or they got married really early and they're still with their spouse, they may have like Venus or Jupiter in their 5th or 7th houses. If they've been married for a long time, probably Jupiter in their 7th house or Venus or both. You get what I'm saying, right? But you want to look at the planets and to see what is the climate of those areas of your life. Now, if you have planets like Mars or Saturn in your 5th or 7th house, Relationships, dating, and commitment may be a bit challenging for you, particularly if you have Saturn in these houses. However, there's a caveat. Saturn can actually really help relationships, especially when it comes to longevity. But I'll get to that a bit later. So by and large, look at the planets that are contained in your 5th and 7th houses. Then the second thing that's going to help you determine the climate of dating and commitment for you in your life is going to be planetary rulers of the 5th and 7th houses. So when it comes to the houses, each house is every sign delineates a particular house in your natal chart. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, if you're new to astrology, definitely check out my series on how to read your natal chart. I explained everything about the houses, the signs, the planets. Check it out. It's gold. I promise you. So every house is a sign. So every sign delineates a house. And every sign has a ruler, okay? Has a planetary ruler. So every sign is ruled by a particular planet. So let's say that you've got Aries as your 5th house. The ruler of Aries is Mars. So you will look to see where Mars is in your natal chart, and that will give you further information on the climate of dating and sex and romance in your life, okay? Now, if you want a complete listing of all of the planetary rulers, hit the link in the description box below. I've got a nice little listing so that you can commit it to memory, all right? So look to the planetary ruler of your 5th and 7th houses, and then again, see what they're doing in your natal chart. So the example I just gave, you've got Aries as your 5th house. So the planetary ruler of Aries is Mars. Let's say you have Mars in your 11th house, okay? So the 11th house covers friendship. So when it comes to dating, okay, you will likely date someone who is a friend, someone you know, an acquaintance, or you may be introduced to someone via a friend, okay? See how that gives a little more color to dating? It's not just that you have Mars in the 5th house, which means that you're bold. It's not just that you have Aries as your 5th house, which means that when it comes to dating and relationships, you're very sexual. You likely have a lot of sex, or you are someone who is just blunt. You're a go-getter. You are someone who chases, someone who really goes after what they want. But the fact that the ruler of Aries, which is Mars, is in your 11th house means that when it comes to dating, friendship is a major theme when it comes to that. You'll either date a friend, like I said before, be introduced to someone that you date by a friend, or a friend may turn into a lover, okay? It may even be a frenemy that you end up dating because Mars is the planet of combat. It's the planet of war. Being in the friend zone, mainly the 11th house, means that maybe someone that you have a conflict with, like I said, a frenemy may actually be someone that you have sex with or someone that you date, all right? The way that you can interpret all of this can get really, really interesting, okay? This is the fun part of astrology. It gets super duper interesting, all right? And the same thing goes for your 7th house. So look to see the sign of your 7th house, determine what the planetary ruler is of that 7th house, and then see what that planet is doing in your natal chart. And that will tell you all about your marriages and your commitments. So let's say you've got Taurus as your 7th house. Now, the planetary ruler of Taurus is Venus. So you would look to Venus in your natal chart and see what Venus is doing, and it'll give you a little more color as to your marriages and your relationships, okay? So let's say you've got Venus in your 8th house in your natal chart. So when it comes to your marriages, it has a lot to do with sex and intimacy. Intimacy may be the glue that holds you together. There's also the element of your spouse's money that is a big factor in your marriage because the 8th house covers other people's money, okay? So you're really going to want to take a look at what planets are in the 5th and 7th houses and the planetary rulers for those houses. Now, again, astrology, there's levels to this shit, right? So it's not just about what planets are in your 5th house or your 7th house or what your planetary ruler is doing in your natal chart. You're going to want to look at the aspects that those planets and planetary rulers are making. And that is definitely another video for another day. All right. So those are the characteristics and the things that you can look for in the natal chart that'll show you how you can get into a relationship. So now let us tackle the most important question on everybody's mind. When are you going to get into a relationship? All right, so now let's talk about when you'll get into a relationship. Now, I have to say, like, this is my personal opinion about this, because I know at certain points I have been conflicted as to the when, right? Especially because I'm someone who's very much into manifesting. I'm on my spiritual journey. And some people will teach you that, you know, manifestation can happen in as little as 3 days or 24 hours, which is definitely true. However, it also correlates to the astrology. The one thing I've learned with being on a spiritual journey is that there is a time and a season for everything, and the astrology will always reflect that. It's not to say that you can't manifest a relationship, but you know how people say, yeah, in God's time or in divine timing? Guess what? That divine timing can be calculated, or at least can be explained via transits. So when it comes to when you're going to get into a relationship, we have to look at transits. So if you're not already familiar, transits are when you compare what's going on in the sky right now or at a certain period in time, and then you relate it to your natal chart. So it's a relation between what's going on now and what was going on at the time of your birth. That will let you know when certain things are going to happen in your life. Certain parts of your life become activated depending on what's going in the sky right now. And by tracking the transits, that's when you'll know when it is a season for relationships or a time for relationships, okay? And there's many, many, many different ways to track this information, different methods, different ideologies. I am just going to skim the surface in terms of long-term and short-term, how to figure out when relationships and love are going to be activated for you, all right? So of course, we got to start with the planets. So when we're looking at transits, we have to look at the transits of Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, okay? Venus obviously is the planet of love and romance. So whatever it's doing in the sky right now, as it pertains or relates to your natal chart, is going to let you know when that's activated in your chart. Same thing with Jupiter. Because Jupiter is a benefic planet and it bestows abundance, relationships are a form of abundance. So tracking the transits of Jupiter as it relates to your natal chart is also going to be super helpful in terms of determining when a relationship is going to pop off for you, or when a current relationship is going to go to the next level. And speaking of next level, I include Saturn in that list because Saturn represents longevity. It represents things that are grounded. It represents commitment and discipline, sort of the not so sexy parts of relationships, right? So tracking the transit of Saturn or the transits of Saturn as it relates to your natal chart is also going to let you know when that person that you're dating is going to turn into a spouse, or when you're taking a relationship to the next level. You know, all of those things can be explained via the transits of these 3 planets. So in terms of the transits of these 3 planets, you're definitely going to want to look at when these planets are going through your 5th and 7th houses, okay? This is obviously when the issues of romance and dating, especially with the 5th house, are going to be activated, or when marriage and commitment are going to be activated, when these 3 planets are going through your 7th house. Now, there's also other houses that these planets move through that will also activate relationship issues, even though they're not going through relationship houses, right? Because there's this thing called aspects, and aspects are the relationship between the planets in a chart, right? And so when 2 planets are at a harmonious angle, it's said that they bestow positivity, or positive things can happen. And the converse is also true. When they're at a harsh angle, it's sort of when you experience challenges or obstacles with respect to the topics that those planets are covering, okay? So when Venus, Saturn, or Jupiter are going through the 1st house, the 3rd house, the 9th house, and the 11th house of your natal chart, right? That is when relationships can also be activated. Because when those planets are in those houses, that is when they have a harmonious angle to the 5th and the 7th houses. I hope that makes sense. I'm about to drop a video on the aspects next week. At the time I'm filming this video, I'm dropping a video on the aspects next week. So subscribe, hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when that video drops, all right? But yes, so when those 3 planets are going through your first house, your third house, your ninth house, and your 11th house, that's when your 5th and 7th house topics, namely romance, dating, marriage, commitment, are going to be activated in a positive sort of way. So it's not just about knowing your natal chart. It's also knowing when points in your natal chart are going to be activated. And we do that through transits. All right. All right. So in terms of the when you're going to get into relationships, I just spoke about, transits and as they relate to your natal chart. But there are other charts in astrology that can actually answer this question as well. All right. So one of the first things that you're going to want to look at in terms of when dating or relationships are going to be highlighted in your life is you're going to want to look at the chart that relates to annual profections. All right. And I will put a link to that in the description box below so you can check it out. But definitely annual profections, it's a very specific sort of prediction tool that astrologers use, especially astrologers that use or study traditional Western astrology. And basically it lets you know at what age or what time in your life those specific topics are going to pop off, okay? So it all depends on your age, all right? So it kind of goes by your birthday. And so whatever ages are covered by the 5th house is when dating and relationships are going to be pronounced in your lifetime. And then whatever age corresponds to your 7th house of marriage and commitment, that is the age when those particular issues are going to pop off in your life. All right. So according to the annual profections, when you are 17, 29, 41, 53, and 65, those are the ages when dating and romance are going to be like hot topics in your lives. All right. Whereas when you are 19, 31, 43, 55, and 67, those are the ages when marriage and commitment, those topics are going to pop off and be highlighted in your life. All right. Again, I'm going to put a link in the description box for you to see what an annual profections chart looks like so that you can determine at what age those particular topics are going to be hot topics in your life. All right. Then another chart that you can look at in terms of figuring out when you're going to get into a relationship is your solar return chart. So very similar to an annual profections chart, a solar return chart is basically just a snapshot of a particular year for you from birthday to birthday. And it'll let you know what topics are definitely going to be hot during that year. So it's definitely on a yearly basis, like I just said, and it really has to do with where the sun is placed. So in your solar return chart, if your sun is in the 5th house or the 7th house, that can indicate a year that's going to be really filled with relationship issues or dating issues or marriage or something like that. Also in your solar return chart, you're going to want to look at Venus. So if you've got Venus in the 5th house or Venus in the 7th house, that can be an indicator of a year having to do with love, romance, and or marriage, okay? Now, so the solar return chart has to do with your year from birthday to birthday. There's also another chart that can tell you on a more frequent level when relationships are going to be a topic, okay? And that is your lunar return chart. So to contrast the two charts, solar return is birthday to birthday. It's when the sun goes back to the exact same position it was at the time that you were born. Now, whenever the moon goes back to the place where it was in your natal chart, that is when you experience a lunar return. So a solar return happens once a year because you have a birthday once a year. Your lunar return happens every month, okay? Think of lunar cycle. The menstruation cycle is 28 days. So every month you have a lunar return. Now, depending on where the moon is in relation to your, wherever the moon is in the lunar return chart, that is the area of life that's going to be emphasized. And remember I said during the how portion that the moon in your chart represents your emotional style, especially when it comes to relationships. So whenever your moon in your lunar return chart is in the 5th or the 7th house, that's when issues related to dating and romance or marriage and commitment are going to come up. Now, some astrologers put these charts together because you can do a complete solar return chart, and within that solar return chart, you do lunar returns, or you can do them separately. I do them separately because if you did them all together, it would be just a lot of information. So those are the two charts that you could look to see when you would be getting into a relationship. And then finally, you would also want to look at your progressed natal chart. So if the natal chart is a snapshot of the cosmos at the time that you were born, your progressed natal chart is like the evolution of your natal chart. The natal chart is a picture. The progressed natal chart is like a movie, okay? So when you look at your progressed natal chart, you're going to want to see if your sun has progressed into either the 5th house or the 7th house. Not everyone is going to experience that, okay? The way the progressed natal charts are set up, unless you have your natal sun in the 4th house or the 6th house, that's when you're going to experience like 5th house and 7th house progressed sun transits, all right? So it's few and far between people will experience that. However, wherever your progressed moon is, that is where there's going to be an emphasis, right? That's also an area of emphasis in your progressed natal chart. So if your progressed moon is in your 5th house, that means that for that period of time, and that period of time will usually last about a year and a 3.5 years, I believe. I'll put the correct timing here because I can't remember off the top of my head. But that period of time, that's when relationships, particularly dating, romance, sex, are going to be popping off in your life. It's going to be a hot topic in your life. Same thing if you have the progressed moon in the 7th house in your progressed natal chart. Same thing, marriage, commitment, all of that stuff is going to be highlighted for that time period that the moon has progressed into that house, all right? There's a lot of different timing techniques that can be used to determine when you're going to get into a relationship. But by and large, whatever questions you have about relationships, whether it's your own style in relationships, whether it's who you're attracted to, what your partner is going to look like, or what season you're in, and if that season is going to reflect issues related to love, romance, and relationships, all of that is answered with astrology. And they say astrology is not real. It's definitely real, all right? So with that being said, I truly hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that you guys have a pleasant Valentine's Day. Some of you hate it, some of you don't, I know. This year, I'm really into it, so I'm excited to see what Valentine's Day has to offer. But in any event, I hope this information was helpful for you. Don't forget to hit the like button, hit that notification bell, subscribe, all of that good stuff so you can be informed when I come out with more videos like this, because trust me, honey, there's a lot coming down the pike that you guys are absolutely gonna love, all right? Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, happy Valentine's Day, and I will see you guys in my next video. Take care.